and off we go. Right. So we are in the middle of a ping pong match. The ping pong match is all about whether we have a machloket, an argument, a disagreement between the various Tanaim as to whether the spoken, vocalized way we say a word in the Torah has precedence, or whether the written word has precedence. In other words, how it looks in the Torah. Now, you remember, originally we said that there was a disagreement, and we had all different examples of where the disagreements were. Various rabbis held that aim lamikra, the way it was spoken, was taking precedence, and others, the Rabbanan, some of them held aim lamasoret, the way it was written down. And then we had Rav Acha bar Yaakov, who threw a complete spanner in the works and said, no. Everybody agrees that it is precedence is given to the way it's spoken. And how do we know that? Because of the pasuk that says, "Lo tavashel gedi b'chalev imo." You shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. It could be read b'chalev imo, in its mother's fat. But nobody holds that you, apart from the Ram, who holds that you can't do either, nobody holds that you can't. There's no Tana that says you can't cook a kid in fat. So therefore, that's a proof, says Rav Yaakov bar Yaakov, that it is all goes according to how you say it, and there's no disagreement between the rabbis. And therefore, in order to prove his point, he had to take each and every one of the examples that we gave earlier on as a disagreement, and he had to show that there was no disagreement, and actually the argument was on something completely different. And last week we started to go through these lists, and we didn't finish. We got as far as Rabbi Shimon's argument, and that's where we're going to pick it up today. Let me share the screen for Sanhedrin, if I can find it. Wait a second. Hang on a moment. There it is. There it is. Okay.
Connie, just before you, I'm sorry I was late, by the way, but just before you go on, Rose has got apologies from Julia. Rose and Julia are both cooking. And
right. Okay, well, I'm recording it so she can listen to it afterwards.
Brilliant, thanks.
Okay, so this is where we got to last time. Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan b'haplige. Okay, remember, Rabbi Shimon was the one who said that we needed, in a sukkah, we needed 4 walls. 4 walls in a sukkah. And then we have a halacha, the Moshe Sinai, we have a halacha from Sinai that the last wall can be just a titchy bit of a wall, 1 fist width, a tefach. So according to Rabbi Shimon, the halacha is that we need 3 complete walls and 1 titchy little wall. The rabbis, on the other hand, they held that we need 3 walls, which can be 2 complete walls and 1 little wall. So originally, the Gemarrah said that the argument was whether we held aim lamikra or aim lamasoret. And we had the whole business of Sukkot, the way Sukkot was spelled, whether Sukkot was spelled with a vav or without a vav. Can you see that? It says Sukkot with a vav or Sukkot without a vav. Now, the one at the bottom without a vav could be read sukat, and therefore it would be one singular sukkah. And that was the original suggestion of Rav Acha bar Yaakov, that that Rabbi Shimon held that it was aim lemikra, and the Rabbanan held that it was aim lemasoret. But now, because of the case of milk and fat, chelev and chalav, we have to say at this point, everybody holds that it's aim lemikra. We go by what it sounds like, and therefore we have to explain this disagreement between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis about how many walls a sukkah has in a different way. And that's what we're going to do now. So, Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan b'ha pligi. The Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan, it's this that they argue with. In brackets, nothing to do with how you say it or how you read it. Rabbi Shimon savar, Rabbi Shimon holds, schacha la ba'ei kra. Schacha. The schach. What is a sukkah? A sukkah is a number of walls, that we're just deciding how many walls, 3 or 4 walls, with a top layer, a roof, which we call schach. Schacha lo ba'ikra. Rabbi Shimon says, you don't need a verse in a special mention of the word sukkah to tell you that you need schach. Why? Because the word sukkah comes from the word schach. That's what a sukkah is. When it says in the verse, Shafti et bnei Israel, I made the bnei Israel dwell in Sukkot, we understand that the word sukkah is a structure with a roof, because the whole idea was it gave some protection and some shade. So Rabbi Shimon says, we don't need a special mention of the schach. The schach is self-understood. Now, Rabbi Shimon holds that we have 4 mentions of the word, 4 lots of sukkah. We only have 3 mentions of sukkah. It's sukkot, sukkot, sukkot. But because we have the idea that it's aim lamikra, it goes how you say it. We say the word sukkot, even though it might be spelt like that, we still say sukkot, which is plural. So we have 3 lots of 2, which is 6. But Rabbi Shimon says, no, the first one, we need the first mentioning of sukkah, of sukkot, because that tells us the subject matter. You can't, and we don't, remember we had the argument about whether you darshan the first mention or not, whether you can expound the first mention. We hold that you don't expound the first mention. So the first word of sukkot in the psukim, we discard, and then we're left with twice where it says sukkot, once with a vav and once without a vav. But Rabbi Shimon says, I'm not interested how it's written, I'm interested in how we say it, and we say sukkot. So that gives me 2 lots of 2, which is 4. I don't need one of those 4 to tell me about the schach. I only need those to tell me about the walls. So therefore, if I don't need it for the schach, all 4 of those sukkots, the 2 lots of 2, must be referring to the walls. So, says Rabbi Shimon, I hold we need 4 walls. I accept, says Rabbi Shimon, that the 4th wall can be a tiddly little 1 fist's worth wall, because that's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So I will allow the 4th wall to be a minor little tefach's width wall. So Rabbi Shimon's opinion is 3 full walls and a little 4th wall. The rabbis, on the other hand, according to this part of the Gemara, agree that we go according to how it's spoken. And it says Sukkot, Sukkot, Sukkot 3 times. They also agree that the first one is used for the subject matter. So they're also left with 4 mentions of Sukkot. Sukkot 2, Sukkot 2, that's 4. But they hold the Rabbanan Savri Schacha Ba'e Kra. I need one of those 4 to tell me that a sukkah has to have schach. Because I don't accept, says the Rabbanan, or we don't accept, says the Rabbanan, that the word sukkah implies and is self-understood that there is schach. So they use up, as it were, one of their 4 available expressions of sukkah to tell us about schach, which leaves them with 3. They also accept that one of those walls can be a tiddly little one. So they say 2 walls which have to be complete and 1 little wall. And therefore, we can now say that we can explain the machloket as not being one of how you say it and how you read it. Because according to this, both Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan hold aim lamikra, that it's the way you say it that is important. Only the Rabbanan use up one of the remaining 4 to teach us about the schach. The halacha, as we discussed last time, is like the Rabbanan, and the halacha is that you need 2 complete walls and a fist's width 3rd wall. So, very good. Now we've explained that. Everybody's agreeing Ein Lamikra. Finally, we come to Rabbi Akiva. Remember, Rabbi Akiva disagreed with the Rabbanan in the case of tum'ah, of impurities. Remember, if you have the blood of a corpse, and you have to have 1 revi'it, which we established was about 81 mil of blood. If there's 81 mil of blood in a room, then that blood will transmit impurity to matmate. It will impart impurity to anyone who goes in the room. Rabbi Akiva said, because the word nafshot is plural, you can see where I think I might have written that one out as well for you. Here we go. You can either write nafshot like that with a vav, or you can write it like that with just a dot and without a vav. It's written without a vav, but Rabbi Akiva says, I go by how it sounds, and therefore I hold that we're talking plural here, and therefore he holds that if there was, let's say, 60 mil from one corpse and 21 mil from a second corpse, that those 2 volumes would join together and impart impurity, impart tumah to the person in the room. The Rabbanan, on the other hand, hold, no, the 81 mil, the revi'it, in order to impart tumah, has to come from 1 corpse. And therefore, in Rabbi Akiva's case, if you went into the room and there was 60 mil from 1 corpse and 21 mil from another corpse, don't know how you would know really, but anyway, let's assume you can work that out. According to the Rabbanan, you would not be tamei, you would not become impure. And originally we said that was because the Rabbanan held ein lemasoret, and they held it's how you write it. And this word nafshot, written without the vav, the bottom of the 2 spellings there, could be vowelized as nafshat in the singular.
Johnny, doesn't the dead body alone make the Kohen, Tommy?
No, the dead body's gone. It's just left a bit of blood behind.
The body's gone. Okay.
You're quite right. If the dead body's in there, there's no shaila.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah. It's a situation where the dead body's been removed and there's remnants left. Yes, Jeffrey.
What's blood doing in the room? I mean, who stores blood from humans?
No, it's not stored. Imagine a scenario, chas v'chalila, a shooter comes in and shoots 2 people, right? And they bleed and they die. And the people are taken out, the dead people are taken out, and they clean up the blood, but they don't clean up all the blood. There's some left, a little bit, a few mils are left.
Well, how can you measure spilt blood?
Well, you have to make an estimation. You have to make an estimation. That's
Bloody mess.
Huh?
It's a bloody mess.
It is a bloody mess. That's right. But they do that in hospitals, Jeffrey. Every operation that goes on in a hospital, you'd have an operation, and the nurses and the doctors use those white swabs, right? And they swab the blood. And at the end of the operation, the surgeon will look at the swabs that have been used. Every swab is kept and counted. They will look at the swabs, and they will estimate the blood loss from those swabs. So you can estimate volume of blood from looking at the swabs, if you know what you're doing. Sometimes they weigh the swabs, okay? So they know that a clean swab, let's say, weighs 20 grams. This one now weighs 30 grams. So we've got 10 grams of blood, 10 grams weight of blood, and that equates, there'll be some equation somewhere that can work out the weight of blood to the volume. So yeah, you can estimate the volume from spilled blood. So it's a possibility. Remember, the Gemarrah is talking theoretically anyway. It's not going to be a case that happens every day. But it is certainly a possibility that you can have blood in a room which could, if it was sufficient. Remember, 81 mil is not very much. It's only really probably a standard little tot that you have for whiskey on a kiddush is about 20 mil, 20, 30 mil. It's only 2 or 3 of those. It's not very much. So it is possible to estimate it. Okay, so yeah, so that was Rabbi Akiva's view. The Rabbanan said no. Originally we said the Rabbanan held that it was how it's written, and it could be a singular nafshat, and therefore you need to have the whole revered, the whole 81 mil from one corpse, in order that the impurity, the ritual impurity, the tumah, will be imparted. So now we have to find an argument which doesn't involve going on to how it's written. So the argument goes like this, according to this Gemarrah now. Rabbi Akiva Savar, nafshot, tarte, mashma. It says nafshot, we read it nafshot, and therefore we're talking plural. So it means 2, quite simply. Rabbi Akiva takes it very literally. Rabbanan Savri, nafshot, da alma mashmi. What it means is, remember, we're talking here about a Kohen Gadol who cannot come to cannot come in contact with any dead bodies at all, not even his parents, none of the close relatives. Normally, a normal Kohen is not allowed to become ritually impure to anybody except his close relatives. A Kohen Gadol is not even allowed to his close relatives. And therefore, when the Rabbanan say, when it says nafshot, it means any corpses in the entire world. Da alma, from the word olam. Da alma mashma, it means in the world. So the Rabbanan don't take the word to be literally a plural meaning 2. They take it to mean there is not a single corpse, any corpse in the world. In other words, all the corpses in the world are forbidden to the Kohen Gadol to come anywhere near, including their blood, but it has to be the blood from one corpse rather than conglomerating them together. So therefore, we can still say that the Rabbanan hold its nafshot the way it's said. They don't have to go on to this argument that we're trying to prove doesn't exist. And there we are. QED, very nice. We've now proved that everybody holds that the precedence is taken to the way we say a word, and nobody holds the way it is written. And that's very nice. We're very happy now, except that we're in a ping pong game, and now the Gemarrah pings it back and says, hang on a minute, Uda kule alma yesh aim la mikra? Question mark. Is that true? Does everybody hold that precedence is given to the spoken way a word is said? And you know that when you get that question, you know that's a rhetorical question, because he's going to come back at you with a proof that that's not the case. So now we started off saying there was a machloket between those who said that the spoken word takes precedence and those who said the written word takes precedence. Then we've just spent 2 weeks proving that that's not the case. Everybody holds that the spoken word holds precedence. And now we're back to the start. We're back to square one, because we're now going to show that there is a difference of opinion between those who hold mikra and masoret, between the written and the spoken word. Vahatanya, have we not learnt in a braita? Letotafot. There is 3 times in the Torah where it says the word totafot. What are totafot? Totafot are your tefillin shel rosh. Your tefillin shel rosh are called totafot. Okay, David Marks, where are the 3 places it says? This is your easy one. Unmute yourself.
Okay. The end of Parashat Bo, and obviously in the Shema in Vayet Chanan and Akev.
Very good, as usual. I thought I might have caught you out at the end of Bo, but I didn't. Right, correct. At the end of Parashat Bo, we're told Totafot. We're told that Totafot, of course, in the first paragraph of Shema, which is in Vayet Chanan, Va'ayu Totafot beinei necha. You've all said that a few million times. And you've said the next one as well, because it's in the next paragraph of Shema. Va'ayu totafot beinei nechem. The same thing. It shall be as a totafot, whatever that means. It shall be a tefillin in beinei necha, between your eyes. In other words, on your head. That's the source for the tefillin shel rosh. Now, as you can see here, in the Steinsaltz Gemarrah, where I'm pointing with my did I write this one out? No, I didn't write this one out. Where I'm pointing with my pointer, the first 2 are written without a vav. Can you see that? Totafot without a vav, totafot without a vav, and the third one is written totafot with a vav. So hare kan arba. So we have 4. So how does he get 4? How does he get 4? Because we've got 2, and 2 is 6. But of course, the first one we don't use, because that has to tell us about the subject matter, same as Sukkot. So we're left with 4. Harikan Arba. What's he talking about? Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. This is Rabbi Yishmael's opinion. What's he talking about? There's 4. 4 what? The answer is there are 4. Can you see this picture over here on the right-hand side? There are 4 little compartments in your tefillin, because there are 4 parshiot, 4 passages of the Torah which mention tefillin go in there. Okay, they all go in there. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you open up your tefillin shel rosh, that's what you'll find. You'll find 4 compartments, and each one has a parasha in them. So he holds, Rabbi Shimon holds, that that's how we have 4. Now, there is a problem with this. Who would like to tell me what the problem with this is? Yes, Johnny Halpern. Can't hear you. Unmute yourself. Johnny, unmute yourself. Yeah.
The second word hasn't got any vowels in it. The first one has got 1, and the last one has got 2.
Okay. You're right. You're right. But what we're talking about is at the end. The first vav doesn't make any difference because that doesn't alter the meaning. Okay, you can't say the with or without the first vav doesn't change the meaning whether it's plural or singular. Only the second vav. Well spotted, but that's not the. That doesn't make a difference to the way it's understood. Only the second vav. Anybody else want to give me an opinion as to why we've got a problem with what the Gemarrah is saying?
Isn't one between einecha for your eyes in the first parsha? The second one is in plural einechem.
That is true, but you're right. That's regarding the eyes. You're right. You're right. But that doesn't alter the totafot. The word totafot is still the same. Okay, David, tell us.
In our Sifrei Torah, they're all written without a vav.
That's right. That's right. Our Sifrei Torah, the ones that we have, if you look in your Sefer Torah, the reason you might have known that if you were extremely observant, is that in your Siddur, in the Shema, in the second paragraph of Shema, V'haya im Shamoah, in your Siddur, you will find that it is printed without the Vav, or at least it should do. Because our version of the Sefer Torah does not accord with the Gemarrah here. Now that's really surprising, isn't it? Our Sefer Torah is not the same Sefer Torah that these Amoraim, and clearly before them the Tanaim, had. They had a Sefer Torah where the Vav over here where I'm pointing was present, and our Sefer Torah, it's absent. Now, if you were going to be as authentic a Jew as you possibly could be, you might have the opinion that, well, we ought to change our Sefer Torah. How can we have a Sefer Torah which doesn't accord with an earlier version of the Sefer Torah? Surely the earlier version of Sefer Torah is going to be more authentic, more accurate. And indeed, there are some opinions that say we should do that. However, the majority opinion, we know by the majority, is that we do not change our Masorah, our tradition that we actually have today. And despite the fact that it is different to that Sefer Torah of the Gemarrah, we don't change it. So we are still, if you like, allowed to learn this Gemarrah and allowed to learn something from it, even though our Sifrei Torah do not accord with the words in the Sefer Torah of the Gemarrah. Okay, so Rabbi Yishmael says there needs to be 4, i.e. 4 compartments like over here in the picture. That's Divrei Rabbi Shimon. Okay, and that's how he, Rabbi Yishmael, sorry, that's how he learns it. Okay, so therefore, it's derived that the tefillin of the Shel Rosh has to have the 4 compartments, and that proves that it's aim la mikra, because that proves that it's aim la mikra. So Rabbi Akiva aim Omer, Rabbi Akiva says we don't need that proof. We don't need a proof from aim la mikra, aim la masorah. We don't need any of that. He says eino tzarich. Why? Tat. If you look at totafot, it's made up, there's the word, totafot. It's made up of tat and pat. Here, it's better to see it in that one. Tat, tet, tet, tat. Pei, taf, pat. Tet, tat, and pat. Rabbi Akiva says, Eino tzarich. I don't need Rabbi Yishmael's argument of whether it's aim la mikra, aim la masoret, not interested. We have got a different proof of why you need 4 compartments. Tat b'katfei shtayim. In the language of katfei, wherever that is, the word tat means two. Pat, ba'afriki, the word pat in the Afriki language, presumably that's somewhere in Africa, will be a bit coincidental if it wasn't. Stein, that also means two, and therefore this word totafot, which Rabbi Akiva says is not a Hebrew word, it's not a pure Lashon HaKodesh word. It comes from two separate languages, one called Katfi and one called Afriki.
Afi is Coptic. Coptic.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Coptic. It's not quite the right way around. The taf and the pei is the other way around, but is that how it translates in the
Yes.
Sonsino?
In the notes, yes.
Okay, so that's Coptic then. And Afriki, what does it say about Afriki?
It says the language of North Africa, or Pergia in Asia Minor.
So the language of North Africa today, of course, is French because of the French colonization of North Africa. But I don't think he's talking about French here. But either way, there are two languages here.
To be talking about Shle, the language Shle, probably.
Okay.
Berber language.
Thank you for that. Whatever it is, it means two. So Rabbi Akiva says, no, you don't need to have this argument about Aim la Mikra, Aim la Masoret. You can learn it from these two words. Okay, and therefore, the Brighter therefore shows us that Rabbi Yishmael holds Aim la Masoret. Rabbi Yishmael holds Aim la Masoret. Rabbi Akiva's not even arguing with him on this discussion. He says, I've got a different proof altogether. But either way, we have proved from this Brighter that it's how it's written that is most important in terms of Rabbi Yishmael's opinion. And therefore we've proved that there is a machloket. So we've pinned it back again. First of all, we said there is a machloket. Then we said there isn't, and we proved it by going through all those different cases in a different manner. And now we've proved that there is a machloket. Okay? So, but then we've got a problem. We're back to the same problem we had in the first place. So we're pinging it back again, because the first problem that we had in the first place was that we have this pasuk, Lo tavashel gedi b'chalei v'mo. Everybody holds that that is the way we say it, not the way we write it. So it's chalev, it's milk, and not fat. There it is. Chalev is milk, chalev is fat. Now, so we've still got this problem. We've still got this problem, because if everybody holds that it's milk and not fat, then that proves that everybody holds that it's how you say it. And we've just said there's a Brighter that says differently. So now what we're going to do? Ella, backwards and forth. This is how the Gemarrah goes. Le'olam pligi. Really, they do argue. V'hani miliki pligi. So how are you gonna square this out, that the Rabbanan, who you tell me hold it's how it's written, how are you going to get around the fact that they also hold that it's milk and not fat? And so they are now going to say, no. There's a difference here. There's a difference. If you have a look, and I wrote these out for a reason. If you have a look at that word, Sukkot and Sukkot, there is a difference between the two, correct? One's got a vav and one hasn't. What's the difference between those two? There isn't a difference. They all have got a chet, a lamed, and a vet. So what they're saying in this piece of Gemarrah is, there is a disagreement when it looks like that, when the words themselves are spelt differently. In other words, with or without a vav, but there is no machloket when it looks like that, when the words are identical, and it's not the way it's written, but the way we pronounce it. So there's a difference in the how that's written. There's a vav in one and not a vav with the other, and there's no difference. So at this point, the Gemarrah says, you're right. There is a disagreement between the Rabbanan and all those other Tanaim, but it's only where there's an extra letter. So in this case of Sukkot, we'd have a disagreement, and in, where's my other one? I don't know what I've done with it now. Oh, here it is. And in this one, the Fashot, that's also, we can have a disagreement about that. So that was Rabbi Akiva's. The Sukkot one, that was Rabbi Shimon's. But we're not going to have a machloket on that one because the words are exactly the same. Chet, lamed, bet. So that's satisfied everybody now, hasn't it? There are those that want to say there are no arguments. You can say, yes, that's fine, you're right. There's no argument where the words look identical. And those that want to say there is an argument, they can agree and say, yeah, but there is an argument where the words don't look identical and there's an extra letter. Very nice. Everybody is happy. Yeah? Except they're not. Okay? They're not. Because the Gemarrah comes along and says, you think you're going to tell me that there's no machloket when the words look the same. I'm going to bring you a case where there is a machloket where the words look the same. That word, yir'eh or yeira'eh, they all are spelled the same. You have a yud, a resh, an aleph, and a hey. You can either read that word yir'eh, he will see, or you can read it yeira'eh, he will be seen. Okay, David, where's that pasuk from? Where's he gone? David Marks, unmute yourself.
Yeah, you got it 3 times. You got it in Mishpatim, in Kitisa, and in Re'eh.
And what's the full pasuk?
Shalosh pamim bashana yeira'eh kol zechurecha et pnei Hashem lokecha.
Okay, excellent. And where do you all know that from? Even if you're not as clever as David Marks and to know exactly where it is in the Torah, you all know that because it's in your Yom Tov davening. 3 times in a year, you shall, every male, yeira'eh zechurecha, we read it yeira'eh, all your males shall be seen, et pnei, et adon pnei, what's the pasuk again, David? I've got it here. The pasuk is, Shalosh pamim b'shana yireh kol zechor et pnei Adon Hashem Elokecha. 3 times in the year, your males shall be seen by the great, the master of the world, Hashem, your God. And that is in our Yom Tov davening. Okay? So there's 2 ways you could read that because it's Yud, Reish, Aleph, Hey. So the Gemarrah says, well, what about this? Yireh, Yeira'eh. Dechi hadadeininu, they're spelled exactly the same, or pligi, and there is an argument, and I'll show you where the argument is, says the Gemarrah. Detanya, we've written in a brisa, we've seen in a brisa, Yochanan ben Dahavai Omer, Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. Rabbi Yochanan ben Dahavai says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema, Hasuma be'achat me'enav, Patur min hara'iyah. Suma is a blind person. A blind person. So, hasuma, the person who is blind, be'achat me'enav, in one of his eyes. Somebody who is blind in one eye. Patur min hara'iyah. According to Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema, somebody who is blind in one eye is not obligated to go to the Beit HaMikdash on the Shalosh Regalim. He is patur. He is exempt from the mitzvah of going to Yerushalayim with his korban chagiga to the Beit HaMikdash. Why? Why should he be exempt from that? He should be exempt from that, according to this opinion. Shenema, it says in our pasuk, Yireh, Yireh, Kederech sheba lirot, kach ba leiraot. Now, what we're talking about here, we're saying here, there's a pasuk in the Torah that says Hashem will look after you with his two eyes. And here it is. Ma lirot bishtei einav, af leiraot bishtei einav. It says that Hashem will look after us in with his two eyes. Right, David, where's that from? Thought I might have caught you out on that. Well done. Yeah. The pasuk is that Hashem will look after us, will look on us, bishtei einav, with his two eyes. So, because the pasuk could read yireh as well as yera'eh, so it could read 3 times a year, all your males will see, not will be seen, but will see the presence of Hashem. And since it also means will be seen by the presence of Hashem, in other words, will appear there, and Hashem will see him, it can mean both, because it says yireh and yera'eh. Because Hashem sees with 2 eyes, because we've got a pasuk there in Akev which has just told us that Hashem, as it were, I mean, how do we know Hashem's got 2 eyes? Maybe Hashem's got 100 eyes, who knows, or 1 eye. Hashem's not got a body at all, so it's a bit difficult to understand. But the Torah tells us in the Lashon B'nai Adam, in the way that of language of people, that Hashem sees us with his 2 eyes. So this opinion, Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema says that this blind person in 1 eye does not have to go to the Beit HaMikdash, because the word Yera'eh could be interpreted as Yir'eh. He will see Hashem, and since Hashem sees us with 2 eyes, we have to see him with 2 eyes. Now, this blind person in 1 eye cannot see him with 2 eyes because he's only got 1 eye that works, and therefore he is not obligated to go to the Beit HaMikdash on the Shalosh Regalim. It's a convoluted argument, but the argument is based on the fact that the word Yera'eh could be said to be Yir'eh, which means that we are making a distinction between the way a word is written and the way it's said, even when the words look identical. There's no extra letter. So when you told me that this was no argument because they were the same letters, that can't be right. So this brighter that says we have a discussion about whether it's Yera'eh or Yir'eh proves that what you told me earlier, that everybody's happy because there's no machloket between the Rabbanan and others where the word is spelled exactly the same, then that can't be right. So therefore we have to think again. And now we're batting it back again. So another opinion comes along and says, you've all missed the point. That verse of Lo Tevashel Gedi B'Chalei V'Imo, the reason that there's no machloket, you've looked at the wrong word. You're looking at the word chalev. You shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. And you're trying to tell me chalev or chalev, chalav, milk or fat. You're looking at the wrong word, he says. Look at the word tevashel. Now, in English, it's not quite the same, but in Hebrew, there is a very distinct meaning to the word bishul. The word bishul, which we translate in English as to cook, and in fact, I just thought of something now. I said to you last week, or maybe the week before even, that we translate lo tavashel gedi b'chalei v'imo was always translated in the old-fashioned chumashim as you shall not seethe a kid in its mother's milk. And I didn't know what seethe meant. I thought it meant to be angry.
Royal.
And in fact, the modern chumashim translate it as cook. But actually, seethe, I think, is a better word, because as I understand it, the word seethe means bishul in Hebrew. The word bishul in Hebrew, cooking, means cooking in a liquid. Okay, which is why, by the way, everything is always very topical. Whenever you're learning Gemarrah, I promise you, you will always find something which is topical to the time of year. We are going to make, we mentioned it earlier today, we are going to make an Eruv Tafshilin tomorrow. And when you make an Eruv Tafshilin, you take two foods. You take one food which is cooked and one which is baked. So traditionally, we take a hard-boiled egg and a challah or a matzah as our Eruv Tafshilin. It doesn't have to be that, it can be whatever you want, but that's tradition. But it should be one baked goods and one cooked goods in water. And that's because we make a distinction in Hebrew. The Hebrew language makes a distinction between bishul and afiyah, between cooking and baking or frying even. So what Rav Acha Bereda Rav Ika, Rav Acha, the son of Rav Ika, is telling us, you missed something, you guys. You missed, it says tevashel. That's bishul. It must be in a liquid. Chelev, fat, is not a liquid. It might become liquidy when you start to heat it up, but that's not bishul. That's, Rashi says it, that's tigun. That's frying. That's frying. That's not bishul at all. Now, we would miss that in the English translation of cooking because there isn't really in English that nuance. There's a bit of a nuance, but there's not that big difference in the way we use language for cooking. You could say you don't cook a kid in its mother's fat. That would not be a ridiculous thing to say. It's not an improper English expression. Whereas it would be, says Rav Acha, the son of Rav Ika, it's incorrect to say that you can be mavashel, you can cook a gedi, a kid, in fat. You can only cook, using that word bishul, in a liquid. And so therefore, when you are presented with those three letters, chet, lam, and bet, it must be milk and it can't be fat. And so therefore, we do not have a situation where you come along to me and say, everybody agrees it's the way it's said, because you've forgotten about the word bishul. Because of the word bishul, it can't be fat. It must be milk. And therefore, you have not got a proof that everybody holds aim lamikra. And there we are. Thankfully, we have now come to our beloved symbol over here, which tells us that we've now exhausted that topic in the Gemarrah. So we went back. Let's work out how many times we went back and forth. Yes, Johnny?
Can I just be topical at the moment, as you just said, there's always something topical. I asked the kasha last night in the shiur, to which Ravido says, my homework, find out the answer. In Parshat Kisisa, it says, V'chag shavua taseh lecha, and in Parshat Re'eh, it says, V'asisa chag shavuot. Folks, it's shavuot. One with a vav, shavuot, and one without a vav.
Okay, so what are we going to learn from that? Okay.
We
really, if we were going to learn anything from it, it should be in our Gemarrah, shouldn't it?
Yeah, I've just looked through a few pages. I didn't see it. But go on, tell me.
I don't know either. We'll find out.
Re'eh and Kisisa.
Whose homework is it, yours or Avido's?
No, he asked me. He didn't know. He said he didn't know why it was one spelled.
Okay, well, and if he's asked you to do it, I don't need to do it. You can tell me as well. We can find out. Okay, that's very good.
From Manchester. I
Let's-
haven't waited to hear.
yeah, I think you might cheat and go and ask your brother.
I have asked them already.
All right, okay. Right, so let's just, before we finish, let's just work out how many ping pongs we had in this wonderful sugya of Gemarrah. We started off with the opinion that there was a machloket between the way it's said, what we learned from the way it's said, and the way it's written. And then we said, no, there wasn't. And we proved all those different cases in a different way. And then we said, oh, yes, there is, but it's not as straightforward as that. It's only a machloket when the words look different. If they look the same, there's no machloket. And then we said, oh, no, that's wrong as well. Even when the words look the same with yera'eh and yir'eh, there is a machloket. So we went back and forth 4 times, and now we seem to have come to the end of that subject. It seems to be accepted now by the Gemarrah that there is a disagreement amongst the rabbis as to whether we hold by the mikra or by the Masoret. And if you like, if this was a whodunit, then Rav Achaba Derev Ika, he was the one who done it by bringing that lovely little twist at the end by pointing us to the word tevashel and proving to us that that has to be milk and not fat. So we've come to the end of that sugya. Next time we are going to go, look what we're going to do next. Does that sound familiar to you? Nanu Rabbanan Dimei Mamanot Bishlosha. We're going right back to the first 3 words of the Mishnah. So we are now not progressing, we're going to regress, but we're going to look at it from a different angle altogether. Okay, we're now going to talk next time. We're going to talk about what type of judges we need, whether they should be experts, etc. We've touched on it already. We're going to go into that in detail for next time. Okay, any questions before we close?
Yes, Johnny.
Yes, David.
Yeah, in a number of examples that have been discussed over the past few weeks, where you've got various mentions of the same halacha, for example, Sukkot, Karnot, with almost all of them, we said the first mention of the word where it appears in the Torah is the subject matter, so we don't count that. When it comes to Bosor B'cholov, lot of Ashel Gedi B'chalevimo, no one suggested that the first time it appears is just the subject matter. Everyone agrees that we derive 3 halachas from the 3 appearances. Why is it different with lot of Ashel Gedi B'chalevimo?
Okay, the answer to your question is very clearly in the way you asked that question so clearly. What does the pasuk say? The pasuk says, "Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo." Do not cook it. So what is the first thing that we learn? Is you're not allowed to cook it. That is the subject matter itself. So it's consistent. The first one is the subject matter. The subject matter is to cook it. The second one is to cook it again. Well, that can't be. So we must learn something from that. So we learn you can't eat it. And then the third one is also cooking. Well, we've already said that, so we must learn something from that. So we learn you can't have hana'ah, you can't have benefit from it. So actually, the answer to your question is actually in the way you asked it. The first one is indeed the subject matter. It's consistent.
Okay, fair enough.
Any other questions before we go? I've got a question for you, Vivian, before you ask me yours. How come your phone is so much clearer today? Have you got a new phone? Unmute yourself, Vivian. Click on mute.
Right, okay. Yes, it's a new phone.
Oh, wonderful. We can see you clearly now. Lovely.
Well, I don't know about that, yes. Now, I just wanted to say, we've got the word boil. Are you going to say that bishul is to boil, and then it would be in the mother's milk?
Yes, you could.
We're making a difference between
No.
boiling.
Boil would be a good description of that, except you could get some clever clogs that comes along and says, if you're going to translate it as boil, that means it's only if the milk reaches boiling point. What if you put the meat inside the milk and you just warm it up a bit? So on the one hand, boil definitely implies a liquid. You can't boil something without a liquid. On the other hand, you're opening yourself up in that translation to somebody trying to catch themselves out of having a meat and milk dish where the milk never came to boiling point, so it was okay. So yeah, the idea that boiled in a liquid, and I think the problem is that the languages don't translate exactly. We have the same thing in when we talk about harvesting fruit. There's a special word in Hebrew for harvesting grapes, and a different word for harvesting olives, and a different word for harvesting wheat. They're all different words. Whereas in English, you could use the same word harvest for all of them. So it's a question of the language not being 100% translatable. And here, to bashel in the Hebrew implies it's got to be in liquid, but it doesn't necessarily imply it has to be at boiling point.
Yes, because that's where the word seethe comes in, because seethe is definitely when it reaches boiling point.
Yeah. Again,
so they're probably right.
Which is why seethe means to be angry. When you reach boiling point, you're seething mad. It's when you're at boiling point. Again, seethe is probably not a great translation either. I don't think there is a translation of tavashel. I think we would have to say cook in liquid. That would have to be the most accurate translation would be to cook in liquid, and not to specify that it has to be at boiling point, because actually it doesn't have to be at boiling point. The halacha is that if it's cooked in over a certain temperature, that's called cooking, and it's nowhere near boiling point. Yes, Leon.
There's the same problem with putting clothes on. There's a different word for putting your shoes on, for putting a shirt on, for putting a tie on in Ivrit.
Right. Yes. I'm not sure what all
makes it awfully difficult. It makes it awfully difficult to learn the language.
Yes, it's one of those foibles you have to know. Yeah, that's true. Yes, Stanley. Unmute.
Okay. If you're cooking, I mean, it says not to cook meat in milk. That is understandable. But if you just put meat in cold milk.
Okay. So if you had meat in cold milk, the halacha is complicated. It depends on the following things. Briefly, this is not a comprehensive answer. Because the comprehensive answer is not one shiur, but a whole range of shiurim. But the answer on 1 foot, as it were, is it depends whether the piece of meat is solid, whether it has got any liquid on it, whether it's got any grease on it, and whether it's got cracks in it. You know how sometimes when you have a piece of meat, it can have cracks. It depends whether it's got... The bottom line is, depending on whether you are able to remove all of that milk completely. Okay? So if it's, for example, if it's cracked and the milk gets in the cracks, forget it. No way you can get it all out. But if the meat is in a certain situation where it's completely smooth, it's completely dry, I mean, the conditions are very difficult for that to happen when you actually go through it. But the important point is there is a possibility that meat that is placed in cold milk by mistake, for example, it's possible, given certain conditions, that you could salvage that piece of meat. But once you've cooked it in there, forget it. Okay. Any other questions? Marcel, did you want to ask a question?
Just a very small point about the use of the language. In England, in English, tea is always come to the boiling point,
Whereas in other countries, like in Israel, for example, you never get boiling water when you order a tea. So this boiling is a very Anglo thing.
I think
Right.
that's a reflection of how the English take their tea more than anything else.
And the other thing, from what you just spoke about now about the meat, I discovered something some 50 years ago. I had a very close friend who was a butcher, and he told me that the meat from the abattoir was delivered by the haulier, delivered the treifa meat as well. He used to have in the same van, and the sides of beef, the treif ones and the kosher ones were delivered by the same person in the same van. I said to him, how is that possible? He said, because until it's kosher, it's not, it doesn't matter. So the question about if cold milk splashes or on the piece of meat, whether it's being put in the water and the salt yet or not.
I'm not sure, but my logic tells me that the same conditions would apply, because the concept is whether you can get that milk out.
Yeah.
I'm surprised. I'd be surprised, Marcel, if that situation that you described. I assume your friend was Murray Massell.
That's right.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if that situation was the case today. I'd be very surprised if a Bet Din would allow delivery of kosher sides of beef in the same van as treifa sides of beef today. I think that's probably a reflection of the more lenient approach to things back in the day than today, because it would be so easy for the delivery guy just to bring out the wrong one, wouldn't it? I mean,
had the seals on it. He checked. He said he checked.
I'd be surprised if they'd allow that today.
It happened on that butcher that was closed in Manchester last year, and Liverpool.
Yeah, that was something else. That was a deliberate fraud. That was completely different. This, I'm talking about a mistake.
Yeah, I agree with you what you said. Yeah.
They also allowed a butcher to buy the block. You know, the big wooden butcher's blocks. They allow them to buy them from a treifa butcher as well.
Now that is interesting.
So porous, and yet they allowed them to do it. And
that's very interesting. It's interesting you should say that, because I'm very surprised that they allowed that, and I'm 99% certain they wouldn't allow it today. When I moved into this house, which was owned by a non-Dati person, the work surfaces, it was all a bit, they were a bit, old-fashioned bohemian types, and they had all sorts of distressed furniture. It looked like just old bits of rubbish to me, but it was apparently very valuable. But what they had for their work surfaces was untreated wood, just like those blocks. And within those wood, because it had been used, it was an old kitchen by this time, there were cracks in the wood, there were scratches in the wood, and it certainly wasn't smooth. And I was not happy. I could have sanded them all down, so I got a completely smooth thing, and then it probably would have been okay to use. But I was not happy to use those surfaces when I moved in here. I didn't know what they'd put on it. I didn't know whether they'd had milk and meat together. And those surfaces they certainly would not have come up to the standard that my father would have expected his kashrut, I can tell you that. And so I was not happy with those wooden surfaces, and we replaced them at the very first opportunity. So I'm surprised at what you just told me there. And I would be staggered if the Manchester Bet Din would allow such a thing today. Ronnie Halpern's nodding in agreement there.
I remember the incident, and I remember my father absolutely saying it wasn't right. He absolutely insisted that timber was porous, and you could not kasher timber the same as you could kasher granite or
Correct. And the only way you could kasher it is to sand it and to take the top layer off it.
You can't. You can't. It goes in.
We've gone further.
It doesn't work. Just sanding it is making it smooth. If you were to,
I suppose that if you were to sand it so that there were no cracks, you could argue that
there's no such thing because the cracks are there, and all you're doing is putting the sand in the cracks.
Yeah, well, we're all in agreement with you, except and what happened in that case? I mean, the base didn't allow it. I mean, it's hard to believe.
I could never get my head around it, and now look at my father, who was furious about it.
We must be talking in the 1960s.
They closed down Muscles, not because of that, but they closed eventually. Muscles.
Yeah, because there was no one to take over it.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
It was on the corner of Scholes Lane there, I remember.
Yeah.
I think it's a blind shop today. Anyway, we must be talking about what in the 60s that occurred.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in the 60s, who would have been the Avbet Din in the 60s?
Dan Golditch.
Diane Golditch. Okay, Diane Golditch. It won't have been the 50s, Marcel. I'll tell you why. It might have been the late 50s. I'll tell you why it won't have been the early 50s. It won't have been the early 50s because in the early 50s, the Avbet Din in Manchester was Rav Yitzchak Weiss, who was known as the Minchat Yitzchak, who then left to become the head of the Bet Din of the Eder Charedit in Jerusalem, and he was the most stringent posek of his entire generation. There's no way in a million years that the Minchat Yitzchak would have allowed such a thing, and I think he left in 56. I could be wrong about that, but I think it was around about 56. So I would wager that was not in his time. It was more likely to be in Diane Golditch's time, who was a much more lenient posek. After Diane Golditch, of course, came Diane Ehrentreu, and then Diane Krause. Then Diane Krause. Diane Krause certainly wouldn't have allowed it. I'd be surprised if Diane Ehrentreu would have allowed it, but you know, things changed. Things were very different. Rabbi Kupitz once told me that at his wedding they didn't even have a mechitza, and that was to the Fagi Kupitz, the daughter of the Fagi Siegel, the daughter of the Rosh Yeshiva. It's unheard of to think about such a thing today. So times change, but it's very interesting. Thanks for bringing that up and for bringing back some memories to all of us Mancunians here. Okay, we'll call it a day. Where's my record button? I'll stop recording. There we go. Stop recording.